As I was reading through Shri Khanna's work, I knew of a woodcutter who lost his axe in a river. A poor woodcutter. He was so upset, he was distraught that he lost his axe. Seeing his sorrow, the river goddess, I'll help you retrieve it. So she jumped into the river, came back with a golden axe. And the man said, no, this is not my axe. So she returned again, jumped right back into the river, one more time, came back this time around with a silver axe. Again he said, no, this is not my axe. She was so impressed. And then she went back again and came back with his old, overused axe. And he said, that's my axe. The story goes that the goddess was so impressed by his honesty that she rewarded him with a fortune. But what I'd like to say is, when I was younger, when I heard the story, I thought this was a story which was about honesty. But as I'm growing older, I'm aware that this story represents so much more. The axe and the woodcutter's association with the axe represents his acceptance of his hard work, of his labor, of all the bitterness that may have come his way, and all the experiences that came his way in his life. And I think this is something that all of us can think about. We're all so quick to embrace happiness, but what do we make of all the bitter experiences in life too? And it's a mark of maturity, of being able to understand the value of that experience and to embrace all kinds of it. Bitterness, sad ones, happiness, and all of it. It's just like a child not liking bitter gourd because it's so sour, but as you're getting older, you're able to appreciate it much more. Now, why am I talking about all this? When I was reading Sir's book, I came across this section where he talks about an officer evaluation that he undertook in Jammu district. And out of the many things that he talks about, he says what has been taught to him, that we must not only be honest, but also appear to be honest. And that is just the beginning of this book. The book matures from that, just as I realized it as young individual. It moves from honesty, grounded in honesty, but moves towards an embracing of all experiences in life. And that, of course, is a long journey, and the book represents that long journey of maturity, humility, hard work, and of course, an embracing of life as is. We have much to learn from this particular book. Once again, we are very, very honored and very happy to be part of this journey through this book launch. By remembering this, let me move into and rather attend to my duty here today, which is to welcome all of you. On behalf of the Alumni Association of St. Stephen's College, I would like to extend first and foremost a warm welcome to the author himself, Shri Inderjit Khanna. Please put your hands together. I would like to welcome Shri Shankar Aiyar, who has been ever so gracious in accepting our invitation and who will be launching the book today. Welcome, sir. And we are also very, very happy to welcome the inspiring Mrs. Shailaja, Chandra, who has also joined us today this evening. Of course, Professor Verghese does not need a special welcome, but welcome nonetheless. I would like to also welcome all of us, all of the former students of college, as well as friends and family who are here in person in the college hall, as well as who joined us virtually. Welcome to each and every one of you, and welcome to the junior members who are eagerly here, waiting to listen to all the panelists here. And a special mention and welcome to the fellows we should put our hands together for them. Fellows from the neighborhood countries who are here with us in college for a duration of time. So welcome to you too. Welcome to each and every one of you once again. Now to take the proceedings of this event forward, I have here with us a very enthusiastic young junior member. This is Shri Dudi from second year BA program, and she was ever so willing and ever so excited about emceeing this event. So I will hand over to Shri. Over to you, Shri.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A warm good afternoon to the eminent guests on the stage and to the wonderful people who have joined us this evening here today for the launch of Flashes Before My Eyes, the Civil Services and more. And allow me to begin with a brief introduction of our speakers this evening, although they need no introduction. We are honored to have here with us Shri Inderjit Khanna, author of the book Flashes Before My Eyes, the Civil Services and more. He is the former Chief Secretary of the Government of Rajasthan and a former student of college from the batch of 1964 mathematics. We are also honored to have here with us Shri Shankar Aiyar, who, as we all know, will be launching this book today. He is former Union Minister and has been a civil servant himself. Shri Shankar Aiyar is also an alumnus from the class of 1961 Economics. It is also a matter of happiness to have joining us former Secretary in the Ministry of Health and Delhi's first woman Chief Secretary, Mrs. Shailaja Chandra. As we proceed with our function today, I would like to kindly invite Professor John Verghese, Principal, St. Stephen's College, to address us all and felicitate the esteemed panelists.
Thank you for your presence here. I know traveling through the traffic in Delhi is a task by itself, and I'm very grateful for your presence here. It means a lot to me and to all of us here. Thank you very much. As principal, every day I go through a series of very, sometimes frustrating experiences. Sometimes it's because of complaints I receive. And recently I got a complaint which was surprisingly not frustrating at all. The complaint was from my librarian. And he came to me and he told me, "Sir, we are having a serious problem here. The shelf dedicated to those authors from college needs to be lengthened a little more, because there are more and more authors from college." And for once, I smiled at that complaint, and I was very happy about it. This afternoon, we are very happy and grateful to welcome into our midst Mr. Inderjit Khanna, who is the reason for all of us being here this afternoon. All of you have, but for me, I want to go a little further, because I think it is very important for every generation to find out what their predecessors had gone through. Because this young generation, the ones in college now and the ones who are going to, it is very important for them to know and understand the heritage that they have come into. And how do they get to know that? One very good way is through a written document. taken, Mr. Khanna, a lot of time and effort. But sir, I want to thank you on behalf of the many generations who are going to read your book and who will benefit from it. There are several chapters in the book, and it's been written in such an interesting fashion that there is something for everyone. If you're from college, there's a little bit of college. If you're from civil services, or if you're aspiring to join the civil services, there's something for you as well. If you're an administrator, yes, there is a lot for you. If you're a family person, yes, there are nuggets strewn throughout the book where you will find a lot of interesting reading. But more importantly, what I am interested in this particular book is the honesty and the integrity which it puts forward. That, I think, is something that our young people should look up to, and that is something that they should follow. For that, sir, I'm very grateful. I'm also very happy to have in our midst Mr. Shankar Aiyar and Mrs. Chandra. Very grateful for your time and your presence here, and for the encouragement you provide through your time and your efforts for all of us. Thank you very much. All of these are from
my eyes, the civil services and more to address the gathering.
Principal Civil College, Shankar Aiyar, my senior in college and senior in service, different service, senior in service. Shailaja, my batchmate, all of you present here, and amongst you all, a very special person. Okay, Amandeep Sadhu, Mr. Amandeep Sadhu, my principal, not in my time, but from my school, Shri. He has taken all the trouble to come from Nainital for this event. I am most grateful to Amandeep for coming for this event. Thanks to all of you for being present. It is a matter of pride to be invited. I remember in December, when someone mentioned this to President in a meeting here, and he said that you must launch it from the college. So that college wants me to, it will be a privilege for me to do so. And that's where it all started. I will not talk about the book. I will leave it to Shankar and Shailaja if they wish to talk about the book. I will talk about the how and the why. I was not very much inclined to write an autobiography. There were occasional mentions, but I said that it's no use because we always end up blowing our own trumpet, which is not very desirable. On 3rd December 2020, to be very precise, it was very early morning. I was looking at the WhatsApp messages in this company. Somebody circulated a message of about 3-4 minutes. For somebody, everybody in this hall calls Amitabh Bachchan. He was able to do well. He said in that brief, there was a clip, so he said 3 things. which struck me. One was the sacrifice made by his parents for the two boys, Amitabh and Asita. Give examples and sacrifice for the keyboard. The second was the emphasis they gave to educating the two boys is very good. And the third, the education that he, Amitabh, received at Shri. It set me thinking that very day that I think in my own family, the situation was quite similar. There were tremendous sacrifices by my parents. Their main focus was educate, and we were three of us, the children. No goodies of the time, whatever they have been. My two grandchildren are here. I keep on reminding them that we lived in an environment where there was an informed life in the realms, everybody knows. No four-wheeler, no two-wheeler, no telephone, no refrigerator, no radio. We can't imagine those circumstances. Where did my mother come from? Bengal. Where did my father come from? Punjab. So I thought to myself that now I said it, I think my circumstances are not different, maybe a little less well off. So I must share with the family, and my sister's grandchildren who are in America probably know even less, and my brother's grandchildren. My main focus was that this generation should know where the roots are. I went along writing it from that day onwards, and from July, when I circulated it to Shailaja, to my carbamate and friend C.K. Virtue, and to another friend of mine, a colleague from the Institute of Management, and our Professor Shri, in their very valuable comments, all three said, you cannot leave this in a private domain. You must share it and put it in the public domain. Guided by their instructions, and for better or for worse, I am sharing it in the public domain. I am very happy with the responses I am getting, and it is very, very encouraging for me when people start remembering their parents, tell me incidents from their parents, some friends like Shailaja tell me incidents about my parents, and others. So it is very, very exciting and exhilarating. To an extent, and I think I have shared it in the book, the great facilitation to my having written this book is the diaries I have kept. And I will confess that I have a diary starting somewhere around July 1967 onwards to this day. I have kept them. I don't realize why I was keeping them, but I just kept them. It became a habit. I don't know why. And then when I got down to writing, I looked over those diaries, they fill up one full shelf in my cupboard, and things came back to me, memories came back to me, dates came back to me. And my parents also, surprisingly, my mother is the first manuscript in about 8 months. The pandemic, of course, facilitated it because I was alone at home, nothing else to do, hardly anything else to do. So I would write as sometimes my daughter, granddaughter, and some when they were visiting me, used to accuse me of sitting at the dining table because I had no office as such at home and writing date into the night. But that was it. I want to acknowledge at this stage, though I am not in Rajasthan and I was an outsider in the state, that I thoroughly enjoyed my work in the state. Pawan Chopra and Chandra are here, I can see them. Pawan succeeded me on his first posting and my first posting at Rajasthan. And it was a delight to work in a state like Rajasthan. I must acknowledge that I am not in Rajasthan, so I don't have to say it before the Chief Minister or anybody else, that we were privileged to work in that state. Probably, when I'm boastful, I will say one of the best states in the country to work in. There may be some flaws, some faults, but we could not have had it better. The politicians were extremely good. You had your ups and downs, there's no doubt. Nobody anywhere can say that he did not have, well, not fisticuffs, but problems with ministers and such people, sometimes even bosses. But there was always somebody who would look over your shoulder and who would be there to take care of. Be it a politician and all parties. I have had the good fortune, I should say, somebody will say misfortune, of serving right from the Janata government, Congress of course before that, in 1977, subsequently in different models of the Congress government, and later again back to the BJP government, in the government of India, in the BJP government, in the NDA alliances in 96, 97. And I think at all stages, if you had any problem, you always had a protector. There was somebody who saw some semblance of reason in what you were trying to say or do, and who reached out to see that no harm came to you. I think what most civil servants obviously are apprehensive of is harm which may come to them. One very simple way of arid and dust-free rivers, but we had to suffer because all the packing and unpacking that we did in any case. But these are things which come along the way and we have to take care of them. Family support is most important. I think so in any vocation, and I think particularly for us, in fact I know I did not, I was even married, I told Yasmin, I said that you have done your BA, but I don't think you should go, because I am transferable and go to India. And she agreed. And yet when Shailaja was growing up, both of us, Yasmin and so, guided her to educate well, be professionally qualified, and work. Of course, she has changed profession from the corporate profession to a teacher, but she has continued to teach. That's how thinking changes, perceptions change, and circumstances make us change. The school I will not talk about so much, there is in the book, there is a chapter. I was reading another autobiography recently by Mani Bhaumik, and it's called Code Name God. And he talked about the sacrifice of his grandmother, who was very fond of him, in Bengal, he lived in Bengal. Now, of course, in America, extremely well, who acknowledged that his grandmother, that was the time of the Bengal famine, starved herself to feed this little boy, who was uneducated, but for him to survive. And he has acknowledged that the grandmother died because of starvation. That's the type of sacrifice that one finds. If I may, with the permission of those on the dais, mention another autobiography I have read, is by a friend from college and my boss in the finance ministry, Monte Gadwalia, which is by the title of Backstage, another element of sacrifice by his father. His father was in the subordinate account service, defense account service. And when he was being promoted to the All India Defense Account Service, his father said, I will forego this promotion. Right? Because he knew that if he was promoted into the All India Account Service, the chances of him being posted to small cantonments and places would be to the detriment of his children's education if they were receiving in Delhi. And Monte has acknowledged in that book this sacrifice, great sacrifice, which enabled him to study in Delhi public school, to study in move on from school. So these are the type of sacrifices which the little ones sometimes overlook. They are not told. I'm not saying we dramatically to them, but they must come to realize this. Another thing, and I'm sitting in the same hall, I don't think I ever had to be on stage. I was not an actor. Already better. Second was Shailaja, who may have acted in plays here. So this is a unique opportunity for me. But I remember one thing. When we sat in the assembly, and Shankar Sahab, who was my teacher in mathematics and my principal, used to address us most mornings. He initiated to me, I was 16, 17 years old at that time, the desire to read Rabindranath Tagore. I am not reading Rabindranath. And I remember Shankar Sahab on the stage reading out poems like Where the Mind is Without Fear. This is still in my head. Obviously, these things had an impact. That's why I said education has its impact on all of us, and we owe it to our teachers and the institutions where we have gone through. I want to share another example. Pardon me for the extra time I'm taking of Inderjit. All those of the guys know him, many present in the hall know him. Inderjit taught me mathematics from my second year onwards. Great athlete, Rhodes Scholar, represented India on his way back in the Rome Olympics, 800 meters, didn't win the medal, but doesn't matter, represented India. Now, why do I acknowledge this teacher called Inderjit? No more, why do? Somewhere down the line in class, I forgot, I must have asked a question which then Inderjit did not have an answer to. Mathematics, some equations, theorems and all that. From 11th February 1962, this was our final year in the BSc. When he sitting in Jabalpur, I said, he asked me for the postcard, I said, it's too precious to me just now. I will give you a photocopy, but not the original. He wrote to another one, professor, teacher, Professor Shri. He said, Inderjit asked, this is sitting in Jabalpur, asked me some question, I did not have the solution. Here is the solution line. Now please give it to him. Those were our teachers. Great men. Another thing about Shankar Sahab, on the writer side. Shankar Sahab, those who may remember him, I don't know whether Pawan had any classes with him. Of course, the teachers at our time always were very dumb. Okay, Shankar Sahab had a habit, first of writing on the board, on blackboard, chalk, etc. And then throwing the duster over his shoulder before he turned up. And we would all wait, not through his ear, wait, where is the duster going to land? We have made sure it doesn't land on our head. And that was sarcastic, very serious, but I suppose that bit of idiosyncrasies were there. Explained by the Hindi word seva. I don't need to say. Civil is extremely important. And I'll tell you what is uncivil, and I'm sure you understand what is civil. I'm not mentioning names, but it's a real story, it's not even a hearsay. Told to me. The director of a department entered the chief secretary's office. He was asked to come and discuss a matter. And he happened to take the deputy director and lady along with him. They both entered. The director was shown a chair and asked to sit. When the lady deputy director was moving towards the chair, who are you? She started mumbling, and then the director took over and explained that since she dealt with the matter, he had brought was that civil. Now, if at that level this is the approach, then I'm afraid we are going in the wrong direction. I thank the college principal for inviting me. I thank Amandeep for coming all the way from Nainital. I had asked him 10, 12 days ago, of course he took 20 books. I hope they are read by somebody there. Posting this, college posting this. When I rang up Mr. Shankar Aiyar, he very kindly agreed and invited me. I said, our days, what is probably I didn't know him so well. He was in a different world by himself, senior to me. And then of course he went off to foreign service. But we came close in our official life when the constitutional amendments were being drafted in the late 80s by Mr. Rajiv Gandhi's government. And when Shankar used to come, and Bazaar, both still in by the way, and they used to come to my secretary's room and we used to say, when I reminded my Shankar of this, he said, no, it is Mr. Baldwin Singh who initiated my thought process into this issue of democratic large institutions and the need for their strengthening. This is where the future goes back at the street. So I thank you all very much for being present today, and I apologize for having taken more time than I should have. Thank you all very much once again. Thank you.
Friends, I think I don't trust my ability to speak extempore anymore. I know that I can, but I don't want to miss out on some of the things that this book stands for. And I'm grateful for being given this opportunity to share some of the things, some which may not like very much, so please do hang on. By now, we have grown accustomed to seeing life in a particular way. Some of us look at current events in terms of fables or stories from children. While some of us discuss war in geopolitical and military terms, others measure losses and gains purely in economic terms. And then there are others who find solace in the small human interest stories which bring to life happenings we can relate to. Largely, Titch's autobiography falls in the last genre. And quite unlike books penned by civil servants, it is grounded in the everyday ups and downs of an honest, hard-working officer, a devoted son, a wonderful parent, a brother, and to all of us, a sincere friend. The book has no stories of triumphs, no exposés or claims about changing the face of India. Here, in fact, are everyday stories that knit together in a pattern. Titch's youth and childhood, life in the IAS and Rajasthan cadre, and postings in Government of India blended in one shade of wool, while the other skein of wool neatly tells his family story: births, deaths, baptisms, confirmations, illnesses, joys, and the inevitability of tragedies. Right through both skeins of wool run one common theme. Titch repeatedly thanks the Lord for all the blessings he has received. He traces his lineage over 10 generations depending on the version of his godfather, Eno Mamu, who joined the UP cadre of the IAS. This gentleman, having distinguished himself by flunking the Tehsildar service exam, got selected for the IAS. Titch's father was born into a Hindu family from Amritsar, but converted to Christianity while still a child. He describes his father often, a clerk working on a salary of 35 rupees a month. In 1959, on his retirement, his father's pension was fixed at rupees 122 per month, which was the year Titch also joined St. Stephen's College. About his mother, he writes, "Mommy was educated only till class 6, but being reasonably proficient in English, was a primary school teacher in Lahore and later for a while in Delhi. But her homilies ring true, which which Tish says she told the younger generation when she was 77, which is my age. I don't think I would have the courage to say any of these things to the two grandchildren I have. She said, as small children, we were taught that we must not hanker after wealth, but be content with what we have. For riches have advantages and disadvantages, and poverty gives much pain. The best in life for all mankind is food, just enough to eat and live comfortably, not too much or too little. My daily prayer for all the three small families of Aruti, that's Stitch's sister, Ronaji, his brother, both no more, and Inder, which is Stitch, is that they may have enough to live and enjoy and pray and thank thee for thy help. Now I come to the chapter on Sherwood College. Stitch describes his boarding school years, starting with how he was admitted into this prestigious hill school, plucked out of a vagrant life of Ulidanda in the back lanes of Aiyar. He explains how his family and the school managed to pay Sherwood's fees, his parents only contributing a fifth of the monthly cost, the rest shared by two benefactors. It was his PT teacher at Sherwood who christened him Titch, a name that has stuck over 7 decades, including within the entire group of Aiyar's batchmates. There's not a single batchmate who calls him Inderjit or Inder. Everyone knows him as Titch. His descriptions brought back memories of my own boarding school, Tara Hall in Simla, and the similarities in the daily timetable and the emphasis that boarding schools then brought on truth, on competitiveness, but also teamwork, sportsmanship, but also the dignity of labor. Titch writes, a considerable portion of the Sherwood chapter has fond reference to his close association with the mega star Amitabh Bachchan, a schoolmate, a classmate, and a friend. Throughout his descriptions, Titch refers to Amitabh's bond with the school and the warmth he gave to his special school friends like Titch. He even included Titch's whole family and relatives in his welcome to his home in Mumbai. At a reunion of Sherwood College, Titch writes, Amitabh hugged each classmate affectionately. Though he has not met some of us since we left school 50 years ago, he recognized all 15 of us. This shows his love for the institution and his desire to meet old friends of his class. Indeed, a lesson for those who forget to value that the closest of all relationships outside the family are the bonds forged in school and college. He also recounts several nuggets about the 5 years spent at St. Stephen's College, but laments. The college has produced many a stalwart who has made a mark in the diverse areas, but for some reason has not got autonomy. Explaining autonomy, remember he was Secretary of the University Grants Commission himself, so he knows what all this is about. Explaining autonomy, he says, for autonomy as college must apply for the same to the university and the UGC. In the case of St. Stephen's College, which is in the public perception, recognized as one of the leading colleges in the country, the university forwarded the application to the UGC, which in turn appointed a committee of experts around May 2017. To the best of my knowledge, writes Stitch, the committee, after visiting the college, recommended for grant of autonomy to the college. The UGC has been unable to take a decision in the matter for nearly 4 years now, probably more like 5. To my knowledge, there are already about 700 colleges in India, mostly in the south, which have so far been granted autonomy by the UGC, he writes. As a tribute, he writes, I am indebted to Sherwood and subsequently to St. Stephen's College in whatever I have been able to achieve in my 41 years of public service as a civil servant. After pursuing several other options, Stitch joined the IAS. Training stories at LBS NAA, that is Lavasna as it is now called, are followed by numerous accounts from his long career. After reading the chronicle, I conclude that Titch followed a dead honest path, never jockeying for postings despite winning the equestrian medal in the academy. He seemed to have generally got on with almost all his bosses, and those include at least chief ministers, union ministers, and secretaries. Having listened to the unending woes of many officers, what is remarkable is how willingly Titch accepted every assignment without chanting the usual problems of spouse's job, children's education, or aged parents, many of which are genuine problems, but which many officers pull out as soon as a difficult posting is on the cards. But no so Titch, not once. His late wife Yasmin, although a qualified teacher, never took up a job. It was entirely Titch's decision. You heard him just now. She greatly contributed to giving Titch security on the domestic front, enabling him to adjust to transfers and assignments across Rajasthan, but also to undertake a 2-year assignment to Aiyar, University Grants Commission, and holding tough assignments like Special Secretary in the Economic Affairs Department, the Director Enforcement, and finally Chief Secretary Rajasthan. His daughter Shonali changed schools 6 times, and there even was a time when his wife was almost running an old age home, looking after Titch's parents and her own mother under one roof. At one stage, Titch's mother and Yasmin's mother both shared one room in Titch's house, and his only child Shonali had to make do behind a partition of cupboards next to the kitchen. This would be a study in domestic management, to which credit goes to Yasmin entirely. Several times the book recounts the financial difficulties he must have faced and how every opportunity had to be found to increase one's income legitimately. To pay for something like his wife's fare to accompany him to the Colombo Plan training in UK, Titch had to take recourse to an anachronism called privilege leave to enable him to encash an extra 30 days of leave. It makes one's blood boil as one sees the extraordinary privileges that present groups of officers enjoy and take for granted. While in Rajasthan, Titch undertook touring almost relentlessly, whether it was to each one of Rajasthan's 26 districts then, or the vast interiors inhabited by tribal people. His meeting Yasmin and marrying her, however, have been described more as a milestone than a romance. But his extreme devotion to Yasmin and his loving care during her illnesses and her last days excludes what I now read from his book, which made me question his decision. He writes, "When Yasmin and I decided to get married, I told her that I would not like her to work because mine was a transferable job and there was no certainty of tenure at any place of posting. She did not oppose this view of mine and therefore never worked. Of course, she developed many interests like gardening, music, reading, cooking, which kept her quite busy. Yasmin had her hands full with the house guests," he writes. "He would invariably accompany me on my tours, which involved night calls in various small towns and villages. She had a special box made with carried our groceries, utensils, and other food items. There was also the looking after of my mother, my father, her mother in their old age over a long period from 1978 to 1997. It's a pretty long time. She never once complained on this account. At one point in time, between 86 and 88, Ronajit's 2 daughters, Shamona and Kavita, who came to live with us in Delhi while they were studying in college and school respectively. All this Yasmin did very lovingly," he writes. Educational institution. "I have acted on this stage, I have participated in debates on this stage, but I also won a prize in this. I won a prize in this very hall at a debate where the topic was set by the St. Stephen's Debating Society, and the topic was, hold your breath, women go to college less to pursue learning than to learn pursue. It speaks volumes about mindsets in the days before Stephania turned poet. I do not intend to dwell on all the chapters in the book, but without question, Titch should be canonized for the hardships he underwent without complaint. To give just one example, because of the unwillingness of a certain Vice Chancellor who had refused to move out of a house earmarked for the Tribal Area Development Commission in Udaipur, Titch found himself homeless. For 3 months, 3 adults, Titch, his wife, and Yasmin's mother stayed in one room in the circuit house, and Shonali was sandwiched somewhere between them. A ferocious upholder of rights myself, I wonder why Titch continued to subject his family to such unacceptable levels of discomfort.
After 4 long months, Titch got his earmarked house, but surprisingly, he expresses no anger, no bitterness. He even turns his daughter's stomach ailment caused by the Udaipur Circuit House water to an advantage by befriending the local pediatrician who became their lifelong friend. If that isn't sainthood, what is? Titch's narrative also described his experience when he was ensconced in the Department of Economic Affairs, the most sought-after posting for IAS officers. Titch gives some insights, but he steers clear of naming the 2 finance secretaries and 3 finance ministers he worked with. He gives nothing away except telling us that 2 of the finance ministers always addressed me as Inderjit. The third always addressed me as Mr. Khanna. The reader can easily decide which salutation was more endearing. Obviously, the more endearing salutation created an environment more conducive to one's work, writes Titch. It took me 3 minutes on Wikipedia for me to ferret out that the 3 FMs were Manmohan Singh, E. Chidambaram, and Yashwant Sinha. I leave the audience to guess who created a not-so-conducive environment for Titch, or you can ask him over tea. As for the 2 finance secretaries, I can tell the audience they were Vijay Kelkar and Montec Singh Alwala. As Chief Secretary Rajasthan, Titch, like all CSs in the country, must have had to climb many mountains. I had to also, even in a place like Delhi. Certainly, small as it might sound, every CS faces a tussle of choosing popularity versus playing fair. The Chief Secretary writes the annual confidential reports of the top ranks not only of the IAS but of the all India services in the state, the Indian Police Service and the Forest Service. Titch writes, being the captain of a team is not a bed of roses. There are times when you annoy your friends and colleagues, but as they say, you still must lead by example. Let me recollect one here that a promotion to the highest post in each of the 3 All India services, the IAS, the IPS and the Indian Forest Service. As CS, you are rubbing shoulders with officers of each of these 3 services daily. They are a major part of your team. Can you afford to annoy some of such colleagues? You would not like to, but sometimes you may have to be able to send a proper message to all other employees in the state. So, we went ahead and in the case of all 3 services, stopped the practice of promoting officers in contravention of the cadre promotion rules. As he writes, my decision did create animosity, but I feel that it sent an appropriate message down the line. Today, these Government of India instructions he laments are being observed more in the breach, resulting in a top-heavy administration with no beneficial results. I feel a little envious that Titch got to work for the most part with politicians who were giants, and in whose case probity and the need for development were never in question. All politicians need hard-working, honest officers, and Titch was fortunate to have sensible, development-minded CMs and ministers like Mehro Singh Shekhawat, Haridev Joshi, and Ashok Gehlot. He was happy to receive a good chip from all his bosses, and he faithfully retained all the letters of appreciation and even reproduced them for readers. He also got the opportunity of spending some time with the future Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, who seems to have liked Titch and trusted him. My career, like so many colleagues I know, and unlike Titch's, had more than a share of ups and downs, and cabinet ministers at the centre often used every ploy to bring me and some other colleagues to heel. Titch has not faced the ingenuity of wily ministers or been unfairly hounded for resisting what was not just irregular but completely illegal. Some of us were made into scapegoats and continue to suffer even today. Titch's stories are a civil servant's, and I want to say this is not a pejorative. This is for everybody who has read Winnie the Pooh or who has not read Winnie the Pooh. That is a masterpiece of writing for children, which brings out not on the surface, it's a story of a teddy bear, but the background is the qualities that were brought for a child to understand through the book. And in my view, and I'm praising Titch for this, I'm not putting it down, this book is more like Winnie the Pooh, and this Winnie the Pooh for civil servants, and despite the absence of stories of humiliation and backstabbing which abound in most civil servants' memoirs, the attributes that one associates with Winnie the Pooh are this is one of the greatest masterpieces, and they are all too evident in Digi's stories. Positive thinking, showing empathy and gratitude, simple living, and finding time to celebrate every major event in the family, which too is a responsibility. That brings me to the greatest of Winnie the Pooh's qualities, making and keeping friends. The book is full of stories of friendships forged not just with individuals, but with entire families. Indeed, those are qualities that any careerist ought to learn from. He ends on a somber note. Minor skirmishes apart, the Lord above sustained, guided, and protected me. My interactions with the best in academia at IIMA and the UGC were rewarding experiences. If I were to be asked which career I would choose if I was 23 years old again, I would without doubt say the civil service. About his family, he concludes, Mummy and Daddy sacrificed their all in bringing us up and in giving us the best education. As years went by, my understanding and love of my parents grew. I can hope that Yasmin and I were able to do something in terms of caring for them and for Yasmin's parents in their sunset years. Arati and Ranajit were anchors for me, giving me all the support that I required. And then there was Yasmin, who came into my life for 50 years and sustained and supported me throughout ungrudgingly. The Lord gave us a princess by the name of Shonali, who joined with Pippin to give us two darling grandchildren, Annette and Joshua, who are here today. May the Lord continue to bless them in the years to come. End stage. Thank you.
Above all, Anne and Shri, who have been organizing this program for us, greetings to all of you. I am so inordinately proud of being a Stephanian that I often made outrageous remarks about people from other colleges, and on one occasion, one of the distinguished predecessors of Professor Verghese had to go by foot all the way to a neighboring college to apologize on my behalf for an outrageous remark that I had made about them. But that's the problem with belonging to an outstanding college. Why should one have to hide one's light under a bushel? In my case especially, well, I'll come to that later. I first want to say that Inderjit and I were indeed in St. Stephen's together, but he was of a different year and pursued a different course. And above all, I was in residence and he belonged to another species of animal life. And so we never really got to know each other then. And it was only many, many decades later that Panchayati Raj brought us together. I don't really remember very much about our meeting when both of us were civil servants. But what I do remember, above all, is that after I became the minister for Panchayati Raj in about 2004, by then Inderjit had retired from the Foreign Service, from the IAS, and he had become the election commissioner for Rajasthan. And in that capacity, he had brought together the election commissioners from all other states and was, I think, the head of that group. And they came up with the most constructive suggestions as to how to make our elections fair and free and the results acceptable to all. It was an outstanding exercise, and it is for that contribution, more than for any other, that I particularly remember it. And I'm therefore very honored to have been asked to release this book. And I have read what he had to say with considerable interest. And so many of the passages that Shailaja read out were in fact a little deja vu for me, because I too had read them and I too had noted them. He mentioned Inderjit did that my interest in Panchayati Raj was stirred by Professor Balbir Singh, who was another eccentric teacher whom people of my generation certainly enjoyed having. But my acquaintance with Professor Balbir Singh started when I arrived late, very late, for my interview. So I was seated on a bench outside the bursar's office, and Professor Balbir Singh rushed in and said to me, "You applied for BA Honours in Political Science, but we don't teach political science at St. Stephen's." So I said to him, "Well, what do you teach?" And he said, "How about economics?" And as a favor to St. Stephen's College, I read Economics Honours in St. Stephen's. Now this is a story which nobody of the present generation will believe, because you have to get 102% in your school leaving before you even consider. And I had done so badly in my school leaving, I couldn't understand this extraordinary offer being made to me to read Economics Honours here at St. Stephen's. And years later, Balbir said to me that, "No, we knew you were very bright." And I said, "But how could you possibly have thought I was very bright, given my results in the senior Cambridge exam?" But clearly there was some kind of a mafia that was exchanging notes between my school and the college, and it is on those completely illegitimate and nepotistic grounds that I succeeded in becoming a member of this college. I, and all three of us actually, belong to a generation of Stephanians who fell into three broad categories. Those who couldn't pass exams at all, and therefore joined tea estates at 4,000 rupees a month. Then there were those who moderately succeeded or failed in their exams, and they went to Calcutta and got covenanted jobs, as it was called, at 2,000 rupees a month. And then there were the idiots who did their exams well and therefore had no option but to go into the civil service at 400 rupees a month. So it was then that we learned that there was an inverse ratio between the position you held and the emoluments that you got. And I think that is the most enduring lesson I have learned from this college. Pride in the college? Why? Well, partly it's connected with Inderjit Khanna's revelation that, notwithstanding his name, he belongs to a Christian family. And that brought to mind two lines that I wrote for the Cooler Talk edition for its 40th anniversary or 50th anniversary. I can't remember quite. But those two lines never got published, and so I'm making bold to share them with you. I said, I talked with pride of Cooler Talk, having been started in my time. I said that it was financed by Peter Phillip. The editor was Sarwar Latif, and the principal writer was Mantik Singh Ahluwalia. And then I added that if you spotted that they were a Christian, a Muslim, and a Sikh, then you are nose to failure. So this was the other big lesson we learned. Region didn't matter, religion didn't matter, caste didn't matter, even the absence of girls didn't matter. Because alas, in those days there were no girl students here. Which is why I'm delighted to see that the chair on which I sat in assembly continues to be as empty as it was in my time, because I was less willing to listen to the word of the Lord than to rush to the coffee house in the hope of striking some kind of result there. But I have to report after all these years that I was totally unsuccessful. I think it took getting into the foreign service to attract a few girls towards me. But it was while I represented St. Stephen's at an elocution contest in Dehradun in 1959, when I was all of 18 years old, that I found myself sitting next to a 16-year-old girl who was representing Lady Irwin College, and 14 years later we got married. So, St. Stephen's has various memories, and I cherish all of them. Now, with respect to my involvement with this book, it all really began in 1959, when I was 18 years old, and in my second year, economics, which I had got into in a bogus manner, and we had Professor Balbir Singh, who most of us remember as constantly hitting his head and thereby upsetting his turban. He talked to us about Panchayati Raj, which at that time was the flavor of the month. For it was in October 1959, indeed on Gandhi Jayanti Day, that Jawaharlal Nehru traveled to Nagaur in Rajasthan, which is Inderjit Khanna's allocated state, and there he inaugurated Panchayati Raj. So it was very much the flavor of the month. And I thought, what a good idea that people should govern themselves instead of being subjected to governance from above. But that got fleshed out when I had my first posting in the Foreign Service in Belgium. Belgium's capital is Brussels, a small little city of less than 1 million inhabitants. And it was governed by 19 communes. 19 communes to look, or municipalities as we would call them in India, to look after 1 million people, each of them with their own police force. So immense pride was generated in people through the communes where they lived. And on one occasion, I heard a cheeky little Belgian boy telling British customs, who asked him at Dover what was his nationality. He replied, Anderlecht, which was in fact a commune in Brussels, which had a famous football team. And his loyalty was so great that instead of describing his nationality as Belgian, he said that he belonged to Anderlecht. Now that is the kind of pride which none of us has, wherever we live. Whether you live in Delhi or you live in a tiny village, you don't believe that you are in control of your lives. Your lives are controlled by IAS officers and their subordinates. And the distance between them, between the rulers and the ruled, is enormous. There is, for one, a great economic gap. For another, there's a great social gap. For a third, you have a great linguistic gap. For a fourth, you have a great cultural gap. And unfortunately, the subordinate staff to the district collector tend to be even worse in their treatment of locals than the transient IAS officer. The IAS officer comes and goes. In the old days of the British Indian Civil Service, which Nehru described as neither Indian nor civil nor a service, there was a practice of dividing the officers between the field wallahs and the centre wallahs. So the field wallahs would spend at least 5 years where they were posted. Now the politicians prevent anyone who's efficient at the grassroots level from remaining there for more than a year or two, because they have other interests which they wish to promote, generally through promoted officers. So the situation has gone, I'm talking about between 1947 and about the time that we joined the service, had gone from bad to worse. And when we found that Jawaharlal Nehru's scheme of Panchayati Raj, which was through administrative fiat, it was through a model law that had been passed by Parliament and been sent on to the states to implement really as they will. The net result was that when Rajiv Gandhi became the Prime Minister, some 30 years later, what Nehru had conceived and what I had been taught in my second year economics course was simply existed only on paper. It wasn't a reality on the ground. And Rajiv Gandhi came to the conclusion that the reason why we were the world's largest democracy was that the Constitution had provisions for democracy through Parliament at the center and for democracy through the legislative assemblies in the states. But we were also the world's least representative democracy because there was no constitutional provision for local self-government, and therefore very arbitrarily state governments either instituted Panchayati Raj and then let them go, or failed to institute Panchayati Raj, or moved like a pendulum from one end of this to the other. The net result was that the people of India did not feel that they were in any way empowered to run their own lives. And that if we were to grow from being the world's largest democracy into being the world's most representative democracy, then we needed to ensure through the Constitution institutions of local self-government so that they became ineluctable, irremovable, and you couldn't go back if there were constitutional provisions. So on that rather naive assumption, Inderjit and I were both involved in that exercise. We worked up a very detailed set of constitutional amendments that are at Part 9 and Part 9A of the Constitution, dealing with rural local self-government and urban local self-government respectively. The provisions in the two parts are virtually the same, except that metropolitan areas are not included. Those will be looked after by other legislation. But up to the municipality level in urban areas and up to the district panchayat in rural areas, we worked out a system of governance which at the time was fairly revolutionary in thought and concept. And to work this out, we left the politics of getting this done to the Prime Minister and his colleagues in the party, while Inderjit and I, along with a few other civil servants, succeeded in preparing the text of the draft parts of the Constitution, which are now numbered 9 and 9A. And considering the very rough ride that those constitutional amendments had in Parliament, they were rejected in Rajiv's time and passed only after he passed away. And I often think if he hadn't been killed, they would perhaps never have been passed. The fact is that we are today back at virtually the same position at which we were before the constitutional amendments were implemented. There has been a serious lack of political will, not only in the state governments, but also in the center, and not only on the part of non-Congress parties, but I'm ashamed to say on the part of my own party, the Congress, in sincerely taking this matter forward. But one thing that no state government has been able to stop is getting people elected to the panchayats. There have been some delays recently in the holding of elections, as for instance in my home state, where for about 5 years we have no elected local bodies. But by and large, elections are taking place regularly. Elections are being organized by state election commissions, which, given the state of our condition, our country, are really pretty independent, pretty fair, pretty free. And so we've succeeded in electing, and now to borrow a phrase from somebody who spoke before me, hold your breath. We have 34 lakh elected representatives in our local bodies. Before this was done, we had at most 5,000 MPs and MLAs. Now we have a total of 34 lakh or 3.4 million elected representatives. And owing to Rajiv Gandhi having introduced provisions for reservations, we have as many as 14 million going on 14 lakh going on 15 lakh women represented. So Stephen's college subject could be thrown out of the window by just looking at what is happening in Panchayati Raj. There are more elected women in India alone than in the rest of the world combined. And yet, none of you was aware of this, because middle class and upper class women say, yeah, it's all right what our maid servants are doing in the panchayat. What about us? Why aren't we in other reservations in the MLAs or among the MPs? Now, I entirely sympathize with that view, that we should have 1/3 representatives of women in the panchayats, in the assemblies and parliament, as we have in the local bodies. But there is a major objection which I think we need to realistically tackle. And the opportunity to rationally tackle it is before us. If you were to have 1/3 reservations introduced in Parliament as it exists now, 1/3 of the men will lose their opportunity to contest again. Now, if the law were to say that 1/3 of the most stupid people in Parliament, or 1/3 of the most corrupt members of Parliament, or 1/3 of those members of Parliament who never speak or ask questions should be dropped, then perhaps there would be a basis for this. But unfortunately, that is not what is being proposed. What is being proposed is that 1/3 of the male members, for no better reason than that they are men, should resign in favor of their places being taken by women. Now, you can't promote gender justice by reversing the process of gender discrimination. However, a solution which has eluded us thus far is becoming available shortly when, after the next census, the government of today, and I think will be followed by the government of tomorrow, if that government of tomorrow happens quite unexpectedly to be different to the government of today, they've said that they're going to increase the number of members of Parliament from its present strength of 540 to over 800. Now that's the opportunity. If we could only agree that all the additional places will be filled by women elected from their respective constituencies, we'd have the kind of gender justice in our higher institutions of democracy as we have already so successfully achieved at the grassroots level. So the Parkatis, as Sharad Yadav described, girls from St. Stephen, will also have an opportunity to represent themselves, whereas till today, only their maidservants have the opportunity. And it is in this respect that Mr. Khanna's state, Rajasthan, has completely disgraced itself, because it was the first state after he retired from even the membership of the election commission. And I was long made. I used to be an excellency, I'm now just an X. So long after I became an X, they said that they will introduce qualifications, which were all directed against women. They said that there should be a certain level of literacy. Knowing well that Rajasthani women are far behind their male counterparts in any kind of education. They said that a woman with more than so many children can't become a member of the panchayat, and if she gets a third child, then she'll have to resign her position. And we all know the reality that women are not really in control of their own fertility, and that it is the man's responsibility to ensure that the number of children is limited. But without recognizing how anti-feminist the entire move was, first Rajasthan and later Haryana have introduced these amendments. And the consequence, at least as far as Haryana is concerned, has been that 85%, note that number, 85% of the women who were elected in the previous round are ineligible to even stand in the next round. They have vacated their spaces under the force of law, under the force of an unjust law, in order to enable St. Stephen's girls to come into their places. And the fact is that there has been a class consequence. Instead of poor women coming into the panchayats, largely because they don't have the ability to go to Chandigarh and live there as maid servants. And therefore the people of the village trusted them more to do their work and to be available to them when they needed something or the other to be done. Whereas the men servants who now get elected spend more of their time in Mohali and Chandigarh and New Delhi and possibly in London and Paris than they do in their villages. So this discrimination, which is based on an assumption that somehow class and education make you better qualified to be a panchayat member, is the mindset that requires massive change. And unfortunately, the present government does not see it in this way. And as I said, my own government, whom I served as the minister for this subject, was also more interested in economic reforms. My friend Montek Singh Ahluwalia used to measure his success by GDP and not by what was the welfare measure that was emerging out of that additional income. And actually he said that, it takes time for extra money to be distributed equitably. We first have to get the money. But the process in the United States or the United Kingdom took 150 years. So I don't think in a democratic country we can look at the poor people and say, don't worry, we are undertaking economic reforms, and the outcome will be that your great-great-grandchild will be as well off as you are. So I think the necessity to undertake major reforms in Panchayati Raj as it is being implemented is an imperative requirement. And I'm saying this in the hope that some of the younger people in this audience who are still to make their careers will agree to accept those 400 rupees, which I think today are up to 20,000 rupees. So maybe you can live even if you join the IAS. And make these kind of changes. They also need to be done in the political sphere. And I assure you I'm trying to do what I can, even though I don't have my support. And I think the real tragedy of Rajiv Gandhi dying in 1991 was that Panchayati Raj, in a sense, died along with him. However, we still have people like Inderjit who are talking about those halcyon days when both of us were involved in working up this major amendment to our Constitution, which has had enormous success. I mentioned the women, but I also need to quickly mention the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes. Among the scheduled castes, as against the 33% reservation for them, the actual share, when I was minister, which was some years ago, in Karnataka, of the scheduled castes was 54%, not 33%. And among the scheduled tribes, it had gone up to as high as 65%. So the poorest in India, those who are not represented in St. Stephen's and whose children don't have the faintest hope of being represented here, if you would go out, if Professor Varghese were to arrange for the current economics honors students and the general student body to go out even to panchayats in the vicinity of Delhi, because Delhi doesn't have panchayats, but to go to Haryana or go to Punjab or go to Rajasthan and all that, I'm sure that Inderjit will be able to help, or go to Western UP, go to Uttarakhand, they will discover what is happening at the grassroots and how what is happening at the grassroots is much more important for the future of India as a democracy than what is happening in Parliament. In any case, nothing is happening in Parliament because the current generation of parliamentarians only goes into Parliament in order to scream at each other and close down the place. So in these circumstances, I'm afraid a Stephen's rescue effort is required to realize the goals for which Inderjit and I have more or less dedicated our professional life. Thank you very much for giving this patient hearing to a somewhat serious subject. I hope I haven't exceeded my limits. Thank you very much.
Of the book, and frankly, I did confess it's not, I haven't mentioned it in the book. This word comes from in chapter 8 and verse 4, where the actual words used are flashes of thunder and lightning. I'm not trying to equate the situation that I have tried to depict with thunder and lightning, but flashes of light, memories that came.
Thank you, sir.
To nutrition, to proper food as you grow up. Associated with that is a lack of access to housing, proper sanitation, proper education, proper health facilities. So is it possible to overcome these problems of poverty? Yes, one way of doing that is for the Maa-Baap Sarkar, sitting either in Delhi or Jaipur, to provide all these goods to the poorest of the poor. Well, I think 75 years of independence have shown that that is simply not possible. It's not getting done. And the fundamental reason for it's not getting done is that the poor are not governing themselves. They are being governed by others. And governed by others according to the perceived priorities of the others. So if we were to devolve power, political power, administrative power, economic power, the required funds, the required functionaries, the required worldwide functions to institutions at the grassroots level, then it is likely that the local people will decide their own priorities and do the work that they most need as they perceive it. And that this form of people's planning, according to the Constitution, could then get formalized at higher levels through a district planning committee and the normal planning process. Now, we've of course abandoned the planning process altogether, but nevertheless, there are states in India, such as Karnataka, Kerala, to an extent Tamil Nadu, and some other states which have been catching up over the years, who are able to integrate the people's priorities into what they're doing. And the people will know whether their biggest problem is spindly children, is it uneducated children, is it women who are suffering from anemia, is it women whose children are dying and they themselves are dying in childbirth? What is the priority in the village? In a country that has approximately 700,000 villages and possibly more, there's nobody in Delhi, no principal of St. Stephen's or an head of the economics department here, who can decide what is the requirement in any given locality. So empowerment is the key to development. Unless you have inclusive governance, you cannot get inclusive development. And that was why the whole scheme of Panchayati Raj was conceived and then written up and then taken through Parliament for inclusion in the Constitution. So since that work has already been done and practice could enable you to work out what needs to be modified, the fact of the matter is that what there is needs to be implemented not only in letter but also in spirit. And the provisions of the Constitution in this regard are partly recommendatory and partly mandatory. Whatever has been mandated has actually been implemented. But what has been only recommended has been held up at the state level by and large. Where it has gone down to the people, remarkable results have ensued as studies made, particularly in the two southern states of Kerala and Karnataka, have indubitably established. So we were monitoring in my time how Panchayati Raj was proceeding in reality in the different states, and it was fascinating to see how we were incentivizing a kind of relay race among the states to be mentioned on Panchayati Raj Day, which is the 24th of April, in Vigyan Bhavan, as having made the most progress. But unfortunately, that exercise has been abandoned with the change of government. And instead of giving states an opportunity to compete with each other, they are subjected to homilies by the Prime Minister. So the spirit has been taken out of the Constitution. And in the absence of the spirit, I'm afraid problems of children with spindly legs will just persist. And I think that is best proved by looking at Gujarat, where some economic indicators are really impressive, but matters relating to human development at the grassroots are lagging far, far behind. So there is a choice that needs to be made between growth and social justice. And if you don't want to make that growth, then you have to make a choice. You've got to remove that choice and say growth and social justice. Now, if that could be done, if a proper balance could be struck between incentives for growth. For example, there are several lakh crore rupees owed to the banks of India by the richest Indians. The number of our billionaires has increased from about 110 at the last count to 140 at the most recent count. Now, why aren't they paying their taxes? Why are they salting their money away elsewhere? If you don't manage to cream off the results of growth into the government exchequer, then there's that much less in the government exchequer to be able to deal with welfare programs. One study I have read shows that for the top 1%, of India's income earners, 54% of their income cannot be traced. The income tax department can't do it, researchers can't do it. They're so clever at finding ways of avoiding the state know what they are earning that a great deal of what we were looking for is actually sitting in Swiss and other banks. And that is why the promise of 15 lakh rupees per every Indian that was made in 2014 had such resonance on the people. If 15 lakh rupees has been stolen from each one of us to be put in a bank abroad, then if we can get that back, that will make us a pretty rich country. But that hasn't happened in the last 8 years, and I doubt it will happen in the next 80 years. That is the nature of capitalism, which is why in St. Stephen I was an avid socialist, and some people say they grew up with me, at least they did, but I continue to hold on to the socialist principles that I was imbued with when I was in St. Stephen's. I haven't changed.
Psalm 106 verse 1 says, Praise the Lord, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Good evening to one and all present here in person and virtually. I would like to start by giving thanks to the Lord Almighty, without whose blessings and guiding hands this event would not have been possible. On behalf of my family, I extend my gratitude to St. Stephen's College and the principal, Professor John Verghese, for hosting this book launch. We are also grateful to Mr. Shankar Aiyar, diplomat, former Union Minister, and alumnus of the college for taking time to launch the book. My thanks also to Mrs. Shailaja, Chandra, former Chief Secretary Delhi, and a very good friend of my Nana, for finding time to attend this event and comment on the book. I extend my gratitude to my Nana for writing this book. If someone had asked me about my family's history a few years ago, I would not have been able to speak about it, as I had very little knowledge of our lineage. But now I can proudly talk about my family's history, all thanks to Nana's book. 16 months ago, Nana got this idea of writing his autobiography, and ever since, it became an obsession for him. It has kept him busy, often late into the night. His initial idea was to share the family's past and his life and career with the grandchildren, leaving them with a history which they would hopefully cherish. This idea, on advice of his friends, is now extended to the public domain. We hope that some good will come from it. There are many learnings from the book, some of them being sacrifices made by our elders, their simple and relatively less complicated lives, their stress on character and values and simple living. The importance of education has also been emphasized. When we think of education, the first thing that comes to our mind is our school and college. Both these institutions have played a vital role in Nana's life. I remember Nana narrating incidents to me from his days at Sherwood and St. Stephen's when I was younger as bedtime stories. Now, I would especially like to thank Mr. Amandeep Sandhu, Principal of Sherwood College, Nainital, for coming for this event. This shows the bond between the school and its students, as also of students with the school. My family has been associated with St. Stephen's College for many generations. My great-grandmother's elder sister was married to Principal Rudia. My Nana, his elder brother, both my parents, and quite a few aunts and uncles are alumni of this shining institution. While Nana was at college, the teachers were a great guiding factor for him. My memory may fail me, but I will always have this book to cherish and remember the past and share it with future generations. I would once again like to thank everyone present here and on the virtual platform. Thank you.